can you find percents? Think about this question during the lesson. The 4th, 5th, and 6th graders at Great Oaks School are taking a field trip. Of the 575 students attending the field trip, how many are 6th graders? What is the sum of the percents in the circle? What is the whole in this situation? The sum of the percents in the circle is 100%. The whole in this situation is the 575 students attending the field trip. What is an equivalent decimal for 36%?
Select your answer.
An equivalent decimal for 36% is 36 hundredths. Equivalent fractions are 36 hundredths or 9/25. Use a double number line diagram and benchmark fraction equivalents to estimate. 36% is approximately equal to 33 1/3% equals 1/3, and 575 is approximately equal to 600. So, 36% of 575 is about 1/3 of 600. About 200 6th graders are attending. You can use the decimal form of a percent to find 36% of 575. The decimal form of 36% is 36 hundredths. Is the answer reasonable? $207 is close to the estimate of 200. The answer is reasonable. There are 207 6th graders attending the field trip. Now you know how you can find percents.
Suppose 68% of the students attending the field trip were boys. How can you use the double number line diagram to find the number of boys and to check whether your answer is reasonable?
Based on the information provided in this double bar, we have this right here that says 36% of 575 is about 1/3 of 600. So if this 1/3 represents that 36%, that means if I add another third, that'll be 2/3. Let me do that in a different color. That'll be 2/3. And so that would be 36% plus 36% because I'm adding another third. So that'll be about 68%. And the question asks, suppose 68% of students attended the field trip were boys. So at the top you have 200 written here for 1/3, so 0 to 200, and then you have blank 600. So the missing number here would be about 400. So there would be about 400 boys on this trip. Then it asks us to check for reasonableness, which means you'd have to find the exact answer. So the exact number of students was 575. So then you would have to take the 68% and multiply that by the 575, and that will tell you the exact number of boys that were on this field trip. And before you do this, you can use a calculator. You can change 68% to a decimal first. So you have this invisible decimal here that you move over 2 spaces to the left. And so now you have decimal 68 times 575, and you would put that in your calculator and get your exact answer of 391. 391 is not far from 400, so you can say that your answer is reasonable.
Dwayne plans to wallpaper 72 and 5/10% of a 60 square foot wall. How many square feet of the wall does Dwayne plan to wallpaper? Find 72 and 5/10% of 60.
First, you need to write an equation. So you have x equals 725 thousandths times 60. And so what they did there was take the 72 and 5/10% and made it a decimal. And you can make that a decimal by moving your decimal place here 2 places to the left. So 1, 2, and then it puts it right in front of that 7. And now you have a decimal version of your percent. And you use that to multiply 60 because it says 72 and 5/10% of 60, which tells us we're multiplying. So we're going to be, that of tells me to multiply. And so we're multiplying those two together to find out that percentage of the 60 square feet. And so x represents what that will equal. And when we multiply it, we get 43 and 5/10 square feet. So Dwayne plans to wallpaper 43 and 5/10 square feet of the wall. Now here it says we're basically finding the percents of these numbers. So as I mentioned in the example, to change a percent to a decimal, you can simply move this, because it already has a decimal, we'll move it over 2 spaces to the left. So now this will be decimal 008. That is the same as that 0.8 or 0.8%, and we multiply that by 35. And again, that word of tells us to multiply. Once again, you take your calculator and times or multiply those numbers, and you get 0 and 28 hundredths as your final answer. You do the same for B. You take the decimal and it's an invisible decimal in this particular percent. It's going to be at the end, and you move it over 2 spaces. So now we have decimal 25 hundredths times 0 and 4/10. And so we multiply that in our calculator, and you will get 0 and 1/10. And that is all you have to do.
What percent of 92 is 11 and 5/10?
Write an equation to solve. They also have this double bar over here. So P times 92 is equal to 11 and 5/10. And remember, we said earlier that of tells us to multiply, so the percent, we don't know what that is yet, is multiplied by 92 should equal 11 and 5/10. So that's where that equation has derived from. Then we need to solve to find P, or the percent. So we're going to do the inverse of multiplication, which is division. And so we're going to divide 92 on both sides of the equation. And so here is what you see. And then next, you actually divide 11 and 5/10 to 92, and you get P is equal to 0 and 125 thousandths, or 12 and 5/10%. And remember that when you have a decimal and you want to make it a percent, you can just move that decimal 2 spaces to the right. And that's why they have that decimal there. And so we go from decimal to percent, real easy, no real math involved. So 11 and 5/10 is 12 and 5/10% of 92. We're continuing practicing to find the missing value, which is percent. So we know from the example, P is for percent of is multiplying, and 120 is what we're multiplying it to, and then equals, that is means equal, 72. You may also write this as 120 times P is equal to 72. Then we have to do the inverse of multiplication, which is division. So we're going to divide 120 on both sides because we want to get that P by itself. So now we have P by itself on this side of the equation because 120 and 120 cancel out. And then you divide the 72 and 120, and you get 0 and 6/10. And so we want that as a percent. So we're going to move our decimal over 2 places to the right. And now that percent is 60%. So what percent of 120 is 72? 60%. Again, we're going to write P times, P is percent, times 80 is equal 140. This may also be written as 80 times P equals 140. We have to do the inverse of multiplication and divide by 80 on both sides so we can get our variable P by itself. That cancels out. Then we have 140 divided by 80, and we get 1 and 75 hundredths. Again, we want this as a percent, so we're going to move that decimal over 2 spaces to the right. So we have 175%. So what percent of 80 is 140? 175%.